Providence is the reality that God has not stepped away from his creation. He's very much still at work in it. And he's still making just beautiful stories out of the messes we make, even when it's not our fault, even when it is. And as we yield to him and as we say yes to him and allow him to do what he does best and let him take care of us and guide us, we can turn that stressful energy into just trust and dependence and reliance on the Good Shepherd. Hello everyone, welcome back to Travel Light. It's your friend Dr. Unoma as always. Guys, if you are joining for the first time, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dr. Unoma. I am a psychiatrist based in sunny Glasgow, Scotland, and I am a child of God and follower of King Jesus. And I'm just really convinced that he cares deeply about us and how we fare. He wants us to live freely and lightly and have the abundant life. So here at Travel Light, we're exploring what that looks like, especially when it comes to our mental and emotional health. Now, in my experience in the church, I shouldn't say my age. Anyway, all the years I've been alive, I've just found that we're not very good at exploring this topic. And yeah, we're marching on and the gates of hell will not prevail, but we want to march on healthy and strong and full of vitality and thriving, right? So that's what Travel Light's all about. We're exploring mental and emotional health through the eyes of our Good Shepherd. And we're really on a journey exploring what it looks like to give access to God in this space. So again, you are so welcome back. And if you haven't yet, can I just take a second to ask you for a wee favor? Can you tap on that subscribe button? It just means that every time I have new comment coming out, you're the first to know and you never miss out on my chat and my lovely voice. So again, welcome back. And one more thing, if you enjoy this content, please go ahead and share with a friend, especially somebody you know would really benefit from the conversations we have. And yeah, just give the video a like. It helps with the algorithm and all that good stuff. So again, just sit back and relax and let's have a chat together. We have been exploring stress for what feels like forever. When I started this series, I was like, yeah, I'm feeling like let's talk about stress because I do think it's one of the big killers of our time or whatever, however we want to put it. But it's one of those things we don't talk about enough maybe. And because life is so comfortable, it feels like there should be less stress. But from what I observe, it feels like it's the other way around. In any case, we've been talking about stress and every time I sit down, more stuff comes out and I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about this aspect and that aspect. So in the last episode, we were talking about attention and how attention affects our stress levels. So basically what we look at or how we turn our attention or what we turn our attention to affects how we, one, perceive or conceptualize stress and how we respond to it. So I hope you found that interesting. Today, we're going to be building on that idea and really exploring how shifting our attention to the reality of God's providence affects the way we look at life and how we manage stress, really. So we're going to be talking about providence. First of all, how good is that word? Like providence. It sounds so noble and just, yeah, providence. And we're going to look at the Bible and look at, patriarchs that came before us and how they trusted God and his providence in times of exceedingly great pressure and stress. And look at how we can take on the example and implement that in our lives today. So welcome again. So providence, as I've said already, what great word. It's just, wow, it sounds very majestic. But it's good to define the word so that we're all on the same page and we're tracking together. When I look at dictionary.com, shout out to dictionary.com. Thank you for the good work you do. It says or defines providence as the foreseeing care and guidance of God or nature over the creatures of the earth. So the foreseeing care and guidance of God. And it also defines it as a manifestation of divine care or direction. And another one, it says God, especially when conceived as omnisciently, directing the universe and the affairs of humankind with wise benevolence. I love that. So providence essentially is the present reality, the assurance that God himself, the creator of the universe, the creator of all things, hasn't walked away from his creation, but he's actually still very much actively involved and continually involved with his creation. And he's upholding it and sustaining it with his hand. And even though, he's given us the earth as our playground, he's very much involved with what's going on in the world. So why is this important? And how can this affect the way we manage stress or our anxiety levels? First of all, knowing and understanding that we can trust that God is our ever-present help, that right now He's very much involved in our lives, whether or not we feel it, yeah, and whether or not we see it. That song, even when I don't see it, you're working. It's actually like for real, real. And even in the mistakes we make, and this is something that I have to remember all the time, when we mess up and when we create a mess, He is actually creating a work of art from that mess. He's constantly working and reworking and shaping our lives according to His will. And the more we partner with Him, the easier, I guess, and the more beautiful life could be, if that makes sense. So we get to relax and not worry about the next 5 years or the next 5 minutes, because we've been called into this partnership and it's a dance. And as we assume our role as being led and being part of the grand story, He takes His place as well, and He does what He does best. And I'm sorry, does that not really comfort you? Does that not reduce the anxiety that you might feel in your heart about what's happening in the next 10 years and what's going on with our world right now, which frankly feels kind of mad, The other day we're talking about current affairs, especially what's happening in the US and things. And I was like, my goodness, is this our timeline? Like 1 minute someone's about to be assassinated, then the next minute someone's stepping down, then the next minute someone's being nominated. It's like, whoa, I was still getting over what happened 5 minutes ago. So much is going on, but actually God is very much involved, and we can actually relax and be a part of what He's doing. So one of the more popular scriptures that we often recite in church is Romans 8:28. And we can all say it together. All things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to His purpose. We all know that all things may not be good, but all things work together for our good. And my goodness, that gives me such peace. And I actually can sense that in my heart now, like, yeah, there are things right now that feel really messy and feel really hard and feel really crushing, but all things are working together for our good. And I love how the TPT got, at this point, I should be an ambassador, right, to this Passion Translation. But the way it puts verse 20 and 29 is absolutely stunning. And I'll just read it out for us. So Romans 8:28-29, the TPT version says, so we are convinced that every detail of our lives is continually woven together for good, for we are His lovers who have been called to fulfill His designed purpose. For He knew all about us before we were born, and He destined us from the beginning to share the likeness of His Son. Wowie, wowie. Every detail continually woven, even the messy bits, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So again, just to remind us that God's providence is so real, and it's not just a comforting idea, but it's a real active and present reality in our lives, even right now. So thinking about what we discussed in the last episode about attention and how what we give attention to can change our perception of stress and change the way we manage stress. How can we then intentionally turn our gaze on the idea? I should stop saying the idea, on the reality that even in the most extenuating circumstances, God is actually very much involved, and we can become more aware of that. It really does change the way pressure feels, right? Because the pressure is then for a moment, because again, all things are being worked and reshaped for our good. So as we turn our gaze to the one who does have the whole world in his hands, not my puny little hands, but his hands are big enough to carry it, our perspective can shift from worry to trust, and we can rest fully on his ability to take care of us and guide us and give us the wisdom that we need to get out of every situation that looks dingy and messy, if that's necessary. So we can consciously direct our attention to God's care, to God's ability to take care of us, and we can then experience a sense of peace and security that really, as I mentioned in 2 episodes before, is our default mood. So remember, as we shift our attention to God's plan, we can become more aware of Christ in us. And we're not flailing about desperately trying to look for help on the outside. And that's still real and true. But we're turning our gaze inwards to his care in us and become more aware of the peace that is in us and experience him in a real and tangible way. So let's kind of go back a few centuries ago and let's talk about one of the more famous personalities in history. Do people ever ask you this? Like, who's your favorite character in the Bible? Mine would be, probably David, obviously. Worship leader and all that. Also love Joshua because, my goodness, wow. If you read the book of Joshua, it's just kind of challenging and inspiring and just like, whoa. But we're not talking about those two today. We're talking about the man Joseph. So we all know the story, the one who was favored by his father and had the multicolored coat to the annoyance of his siblings. But the book of Genesis details the journey of Joseph from obviously being a dreamer to being hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, my goodness, by his own brothers, and then imprisoned when he was in Egypt because he'd been sold to Potiphar, who was an Egyptian officer and somehow managed to gain favor somehow. And then obviously managed his household. And then Potiphar's wife, naughty, falsely accuses him of attempting to seduce her. And then he gets imprisoned. And in the prison, obviously, Joseph doesn't stop being who he is. He's still a man who's very much been led by God. And he interprets the dreams of Potiphar's cupbearer and baker. And Pharaoh hears about, obviously, Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. And then he has his own very crazy dream. Dreams are wild sometimes, right? And Joseph's able to interpret it. And following on from that, Pharaoh's like, who is this dude? Do you know what? I'm going to make you second in command and oversee the preparations for the famine that you've been able to, figure out for me anyway. And we can move on from that. Well, following on from that, his family, before I get there, a famine descends pretty much, it sounds like the whole Middle East or wherever the area was. And the Joseph's family are obviously in need of food. And then they come to Egypt. We know the story. And they don't recognize him because he's now a prince, And Joseph tests his brothers to see if they have changed, kind of. He reveals his identity to them and then forgives them. And he invites them to live in Egypt where they're provided for during the famine. So obviously, I'm thinking when Joseph was in the prison and he's faced with so much pressure, especially when he was thrown into that jail cell for having done nothing. He did the right thing. So he was literally persecuted for righteousness' sake. But in that moment, is he thinking, God's hand is still on? It's hard. But when we look back and we retrospectively investigate what happened and we reflect on what's happened, it's very clear that God was at work throughout the whole process. That even in the midst of the jealousy and the hatred by his brothers and being sold into slavery, God was still very much like a part of it, and he was still very present. So one of my favorite scriptures, genuinely, what I often I recite to myself when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling like was it a fish out of water, is Genesis 39:1. And it's, again, within the context of the story of Joseph. And what's happening at this point is Joseph has been sold into slavery and he's about to be bought by Potiphar, or is bought by Potiphar. And the Bible says in Genesis 39:1, it says, the Lord was with Joseph and he was a successful man. Wow. The Lord was with Joseph as a slave and he was a successful man as a slave. That's like crazy. So as a slave living in Potiphar's home, God was still very much at work in Joseph's life. So can you just be reassured that wherever stage, wherever age you find yourself right now, wherever pressures you have, like, God is actually right there right now, like with you. And he's still at work with you. And it's not your title, it's not your profession, it's not your stage, it's not your accomplishments that makes you successful. It's the presence of Yahweh himself that makes you a success. Which is why even in the midst of Joseph being stripped of nothing, no family, no friends, I was going to recite a song there, the Lord was with him. And even more importantly, Lord is with you is more important thing. But what's awesome, what I find so curious and so fascinating is in the midst of that, he was still a successful man. So, in the midst of the most challenging and the inexplicable circumstances, the things that don't make sense, and you've got tons of questions, God is still at work. And as we shift our attention to the pressure, or shift our gaze to the reality that he's there with us in the midst of a fire, let that peace just wash over you, because that is real, that is true, that is a present reality. So, I remember a few years ago, I really love talking to people about Jesus, and I really want to start doing that more, because obviously I fell off a little bit. Oh, Lord help me. The cares of life and stuff. But anyway, I love when you're in conversations with people and somehow the Lord comes up. Again, I never find that as coincidence. It's, when people can smell God off you, for lack of a better word, he just comes up, because we can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? Because he's there. Anyway, so I remember one of my colleagues, we were at this lecture, and we're just, how did it even happen? Well, at a lecture where this is when I was a trainee, and we're just kind of chatting, and then my relationship with God came up for whatever reason. And she's like, oh yeah, so what's up with like your whole Jesus thing? I was like, yeah, I was just like, this is how I find him, and like my relationship with God, blah, blah, blah. Of course, I'm like bigging up the Lord and stuff like that. And she's like, yeah, I mean, she was really respectful, and, she was listening to me, but she's just like probably thinking, yeah, sounds great for you. And then she then goes, yeah, I can see how it brings like people comfort. But the way it's said is almost like, oh, I mean, that's cute, like tooth fairy comfort. And, I was thinking about that recently. This is not many years ago. And I thought, you know what? Actually, yeah, comfort. Like, we all need comfort right now. The world is in such a mess that comfort is actually kind of underestimated and undervalued. So actually, even if that were the only thing that having God brought me, I think I'm cool with that, because you can't buy it. You can't buy comfort, actually. And yeah, Holy Spirit is the comforter. So anyway, having that reassurance of God's providence. I don't know why I told you that story. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. But comfort is actually real. And it's not just like tooth fairy stuff. It's like a real thing. Comfort and joy is real. Having a reliance, that reassurance of God's presence in our lives, that actually just ought to reduce the anxiety and pressure that you feel. That's real psychology there. We have an increased sense of peace and stability, even when things are shaking, especially now, in uncertain times, including now. And we have an enhanced ability to cope with challenges, just even by believing that there is something greater than us. And yes, in the midst of all the big stuff, he knows your name, he calls your name, but there is still this beautiful story being written, this restoration of God's creation to himself. Like, it's awesome. Like, the story gets better and better over time. It's amazing. And you know what? Even science proves that having this faith on providence, on the Lord himself, on the reality that he's out there and still here with us, Emmanuel, God with us, is a protective factor against stress. This is scientifically proven. It's against a protective factor against stress and mental illness, and because it offers coping mechanisms, it offers social support, a sense of meaning and purpose, and promoting healthier lifestyles. I know from my practice, so as a psychiatrist, when we are looking at people, we often think about a biopsychosocial model, meaning biology, psychology, and social, meaning social, meaning that we look at everybody in like holistically. We don't just go, oh, the person's hearing voices. No, we're thinking, what are the biological factors that are affecting this or perpetuating this and protecting against these symptoms? What are the psychological factors? What's their mindset like? What are the personality like? And socially, who've they got around them? Things like that. So because we have that framework in mental health, one of the things that we often provide our patients is access to a chaplain, because we recognize that faith is actually of value. Now, when I say faith in this context, I'm meaning all faiths. But when I'm talking about faith in this podcast, I'm talking like Yahweh, Jesus himself, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, like Emmanuel. This is who we're talking about. So even data, empirical evidence supports that the having involvement with religious activities, just basic religious activities, including Christianity, to be fair, enhances your mental health and resilience. And that indicates that faith can help people navigate life's challenges more effectively. Granted, there's some people who may, and this is also a reality, some people develop symptoms where their beliefs in scripture and God becomes a bit distorted, and they have unusual experiences and things. And that is the case. But on the whole, having that trust and having that awareness of God's providence is a protector, ultimately a protector against the stresses of life. So let's chat about practical ways to cultivate trust and providence. Let's think about that. How can we become more aware? How can we shift our gaze and attention on the reality of God's presence and active involvement in our daily lives? Obviously, basic things. Daily prayer, meditation. We can focus on God's promises and his care, focusing on his presence and awareness of that. Another big one, which I know everyone knows this, especially if you go to church regularly, it's so important to reflect on past experiences where God has come through. You know, like when everybody has been through something, everybody has had rough moments where we eventually triumphed, thank God, you know. And if you are wise, you will sit back and look at the ways God was present even when you weren't aware. These things tend to become more evident because, you know, obviously say hindsight is 2020, right? But it's actually really important, especially when you tell your kids, when you tell your testimony, you're like, my gosh, when I look back now, I see such and such and such and such. So that's really important when we're going through stressful moments or when we're going through pressure, especially if it's pressure that we've been through before. We can go and be like, oh my goodness, yeah, this has happened before. This feels familiar. But actually, when I look back, I see where God has shown up in this area, and I know he's faithful and he can do it again. Also, like, get involved in the community. As I was mentioning with our framework in mental health, biopsychosocial, social, super important. If you are anything like me, my goodness, I love my own company. I can be with myself like for a week and feel nothing just because I'm just like, la da da da, oh, just me and the Lord. Netflix, terrible, I shouldn't say Netflix, but we get the point. Meaning some of us are maybe more prone to introversion, and some are a bit more extroverted and just love being around company. But guys, having community is a non-negotiable. Like Jesus is big on that stuff. So get involved in community, and it just provides that support and encouragement. Hearing other people's testimonies of God's providence as well is also a useful way of reminding you that maybe you're focusing on the wrong thing, and it's time to turn your attention on what's going to bring you that sense of resilience and can-do and peace and just, again, comfort, because it's so underrated. And I've touched on mindfulness a few times, you know, this idea of being connected to the present moment, because a lot of times our minds are, especially when we're like kind of letting that default mode network activate, our minds just trail off, and it's kind of self-referential, and it's not really doing much, but it's not particularly the most positive thing. But when we bring our minds back to the present moment, because that's where he is, because he's the I am that I am, he is right here in this moment, yeah, we can enjoy him. We can be right here, and we can become more aware and become more skilled at recognizing God's hand in our daily lives. Another good one is gratitude, guys, which we'll be talking about very soon, chatting about how that is super important. So, as I was saying earlier, everybody has their own stories of triumph. We've all had testimonies of, even the wee ones, obviously they're the big ones, stories of how, wow, not speaking very well today, but how God has shown up in times of, again, great pressure just like he showed up in Joseph's life. So really important that you share your own testimonies with people, even as you're reflecting upon them yourself. I every time I think about hardship and things, and if I'm going through pressure times, one of the testimonies I will often think about, or I love to share to other people who are going through things, is, my gosh, my testimony of when I was in university. This is a long one, so I'm going to really, 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 really condense it. But I went through a patch in my training in medical school where like my parents went through some financial hardship and were not able to pay my fees. Oh, it was stressful. And being an international student, it meant that I was paying like basically through my nose. But over the years, over like 4 years, I accrued a debt of £54,000. And that was then. And even now, that's like crazy money. I had no idea how this money was going to come. And I had to leave school because I just couldn't stay and do it. Like, they'd been gracious for 4 years. I'd be like, girl, pay up or get out. And I was like, oh, am I like going to have no degree? And what was frustrating for me was, I had actually done quite well. I never had a resit. I'd kind of sailed through. Thank God I had like great favor with my university work. So that wasn't a problem. The problem was going to be finances. Like, ouch. Anyway, so I left school for a year. And in that year, man, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, well, Lord, looks like you're going to have to come through because literally nowhere I can go, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide and all that stuff. Anyway, long story short, gosh, I have to do a whole episode about this because it's really cool. It's a really cool testimony. But through speaking to this person and speaking to that person in prayer and praise worship and just practicing God's voice and things like that, I got led to somebody who gave me £20,000 just because God said. Like, how do you even explain that? But more relevant to this topic is when I sit back and I look back on that year, which was hard. It was hard. I just see God's work. I see him in the moment. There was a day I was sat in my room, not sure what to do. And I just kept feeling a nudge to call a particular office to ask for help. I had no idea. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, Lord, that was you. That was your voice. That was you knocking at my heart to contact said person. Even though I didn't know who that person was, but it was obeying that nudge led to me speaking to this person, that person, that person, that person, and then leading to the person who eventually gave me 20,000. And then another, like a grant gave me 8,000, and the money just came. Again, I should share this testimony one day. I will. But it's again about looking back and you see how he was there the entire time. And the times I felt like I had nowhere to turn. What was I going to do? And feeling maybe a bit desperate and a little bit hopeless at times, he was still there. And when I look back now, I didn't need to feel hopeless. I didn't need to feel like there wasn't going to be a way out. So what could I have done differently is in those moments, I could have turned my attention to his presence and been more aware of his care. Again, Providence is the reality that God has not stepped away from his creation. He's very much still at work in it. And he's still making just beautiful stories out of the messes we make, even when it's not our fault and even when it is. And as we yield to him and as we say yes to him and allow him to do what he does best and let him take care of us and guide us, we can turn that stressful energy into just trust and dependence and reliance on the Good Shepherd. Again, it's never easy when you're in the cooker pot, or is it a pressure cooker, not cooker pot? That didn't make any sense. But actually, that's what he's calling us to do. Because, stress can be good and it's positive. But it's when it's overwhelming and that sense of I can't do this anymore. I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to crash. And there's no reserves left. And the cortisol levels are high. And then we're becoming sick. That's not good. So I want us to, as we wrap up, I want to just encourage you to, just reflect on this. How can you trust in the reality of God's providence help you manage stress and find peace even now? It's important that we don't underestimate the effect of the happenings in the world on our hearts. Obviously, I think we're all very used to things moving so quickly and the news being so crazy. As Jesus said, wars and rumors of wars. And we may not be aware of, that phrase, death by 1,000 paper cuts. You've heard that before. It's like it's chipping at you slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly, until you're overwhelmed and you're not sure why, but it's been a lot over time. But anyway, in the midst of all that chaos anyway that was happening in the world, it's really, really possible to embrace peace on the inside and be aware of God's providence and allow him to work those things out, even when we've been the ones to make a mess, as we have. The world being like this is us, right? It's not the politicians' fault. It's us. We're all doing this all together. So anyway, reflect on that. How can you trust in the reality of God's providence help you manage stress better and find peace and enjoy the comfort that everybody feels is like doesn't mean anything, but actually it's so underestimated? I'm going to just leave you with a final thought. It's a verse from Psalm 46. Psalm 46, 1-5. It's beautiful. Psalm 46, 1-5 says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Amen. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for joining. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about how prayer and just practicing meditation, another controversial one, can be great tools for stress management today. So catch that one in the next episode. Until then, guys, continue to travel light. Life is good, and he is still very much involved in whatever you're going through. So till next time, guys, I'll see you then. Bye.